May 1942. The United States Navy is 6 months removed from the worst defeat in its history. Pearl Harbor has gutted the battleship fleet. Morale across the Pacific is broken, and now, in a windowless basement at Pearl Harbor, behind the supply office, down a corridor almost nobody has clearance to enter, a man in a bathrobe and slippers is telling Admiral Chester Nimitz where the next Japanese attack will fall. His name is Commander Joseph Rochefort. He runs Station Hypo, a team of codebreakers, linguists, and radio analysts crammed into a bunker they call the dungeon. Rochefort has not left this room in days. He is not bathed. He has barely slept. But he has broken enough of the Japanese Naval Code, JN-25, to deliver an assessment that will either save the Pacific Fleet or destroy it. The Japanese are coming. Their target is Midway. Washington disagrees. The Office of Naval Communications, led by Captain John Redman, whose brother Rear Admiral Joseph Redman wields considerable influence, insists the target is elsewhere. The Aleutians, possibly the West Coast. Certainly not Midway. Commander Redman calls Rochefort uncooperative and argues that Station Hypo's analysis cannot be trusted. Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations and Nimitz's superior, is persuaded by Washington. Chester Nimitz faces an impossible choice. Trust the man in the bathrobe, a codebreaker his own headquarters considers unreliable, or follow the judgment of every senior intelligence officer in Washington. If Rochefort is wrong, Nimitz will have committed what remains of the Pacific Fleet to a trap of his own making. There will be no carriers left, no second chance. Nimitz trusts Rochefort. To confirm Rochefort's assessment, Nimitz approves a deception. The garrison at Midway sends an unencrypted emergency radio message. The water distillation system has broken down. The island needs fresh water immediately. Within hours, Japanese radio traffic mentions that their target, designated AF, is short on fresh water. Midway's water system is working perfectly. But now Chester Nimitz knows exactly where the Battle of Midway will be fought. He orders 3 carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and the hastily repaired Yorktown, to a position northeast of Midway. The ambush point is designated Point Luck. It is not a name chosen lightly. There is one complication. Admiral William Halsey, Nimitz's best carrier tactician, is hospitalized with severe dermatitis. Halsey recommends Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance, a cruiser commander with no carrier combat experience, to replace him. And Vice Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher, who lost the carrier Lexington at the Coral Sea just weeks earlier, will have overall tactical command. Admiral King objects to Fletcher. Nimitz overrules him. On May 29th, Nimitz writes to King about Fletcher. He is an excellent, seagoing, fighting naval officer. It is not a suggestion, it is a statement. Nimitz has now committed everything he has, 3 carriers, 8 cruisers, 15 destroyers, against a Japanese force of 4 fleet carriers, 11 battleships, 22 cruisers, and 65 destroyers. The numbers are not close. If the intelligence is wrong, the Pacific War is over. But Nimitz has done something no other commander in the Pacific has done. He has trusted the people closest to the problem over the people farthest from it. He has trusted Rochefort over Washington, Fletcher over King, Spruance over convention. Now he must wait. June 4th, 1942, dawn over Midway. The Japanese carrier strike force, the Kido Butai, the same 4 carriers that devastated Pearl Harbor, launches 108 aircraft against Midway Island in 7 minutes. Vice Admiral Chuchi Nagumo expects an easy bombardment. He does not know 3 American carriers are waiting 150 miles to the northeast. At Pearl Harbor, Nimitz is monitoring radio traffic. His intelligence officer, Lieutenant Commander Edwin Layton, had predicted the Japanese carriers would approach from the northwest on a bearing of 325 degrees, at a distance of approximately 175 miles from Midway, at around 0700 local time. The first sighting report places the Japanese carriers on a bearing of 320 degrees, 180 miles from Midway at 034. Nimitz turns to Layton with a quiet smile. Well, you were only 5 minutes, 5 degrees, and 5 miles out. The intelligence is perfect. The execution is not. Hornet's Air Group Commander, Commander Stanhope Ring, leads his dive bombers and fighters on an incorrect heading, 265 degrees instead of the 240 indicated by the contact report. The dive bombers never find the Japanese fleet. 10 Wildcat fighters run out of fuel and ditch in the ocean. It becomes known as the flight to nowhere. Only one man disobeys. Lieutenant Commander John Waldron, leading Torpedo Squadron 8, breaks formation and follows his own heading. He finds the Japanese carriers. He attacks without fighter escort, without dive bomber support, in obsolete Devastator torpedo planes with unreliable torpedoes. All 15 aircraft are shot down. Only one man survives, Ensign George Gay, floating in the water, watching the battle unfold above him. Not a single torpedo hits. Waldron's squadron is followed by 2 more torpedo attacks, Torpedo 6 from Enterprise and Torpedo 3 from Yorktown. The result is the same, no hits, devastating losses. Of 99 men in the 42 torpedo planes lost that morning, only 3 survive. But their sacrifice forces a chain of events that Nagumo cannot recover from. The relentless low-altitude attacks pull every Japanese fighter down to sea level. Zero after zero descends to chase torpedo bombers. For 2.5 hours, not a single American aircraft scores a hit on a Japanese ship, but the attacks never stop. Then, at 10:25, dive bombers from Enterprise and Yorktown arrive overhead. The Japanese Combat Air Patrol is on the deck. The flight decks below are crowded with armed and fueled aircraft. There is no defense. In 6 minutes, 3 Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, are fatally ablaze. The 4th, Hiryu, launches a counterstrike that cripples Yorktown before Enterprise dive bombers find her that afternoon. 4 Japanese fleet carriers sink. The same 4 that attacked Pearl Harbor. The Battle of Midway is a decisive American victory, but buried inside that victory is a catalogue of errors that would end careers under any other commander. Ring's flight to nowhere, an entire air group wasted. The failure to coordinate attacks between carriers. Torpedo bombers sent in without fighter cover, wave after wave. The loss of Yorktown, first to air attack, then to a Japanese submarine, because the destroyer screen failed to protect her. Every one of these failures has a name attached to it. Ring, Mitscher, Browning, Fletcher. Spruance made decisions that would be second-guessed for decades. Even Nimitz's own plan, a coordinated strike from Midway and the carriers arriving simultaneously, had failed. The Midway-based aircraft attacked alone and were massacred. 307 Americans are dead. 1 carrier is lost. 150 aircraft destroyed. Washington wants answers. The victory at Midway in 1942 should have united the U.S. Navy. Instead, it triggers a war within the war, because the intelligence that made the Battle of Midway possible came from Rochefort, and Rochefort had proven Washington wrong. The Redman brothers move quickly. Captain John Redman, who had insisted Midway was not the target, begins building a case that Station Hypo's success was actually a shared effort, that Washington's Station Negat deserves equal credit. The argument has no basis in the operational record. But the Redmans have something Rochefort does not, the ear of Admiral King. When Admiral Nimitz recommends Rochefort for the Distinguished Service Medal, the Navy's highest non-combat decoration, King vetoes it. To award Rochefort the medal would be an admission that Washington had committed an intelligence blunder. That is unacceptable. What happens next is not a demotion, it is an erasure. By November 1942, 5 months after Midway, Rochefort is relieved of command at Station Hypo. The official explanation is a routine transfer. The reality is punishment. He is sent to San Francisco to command a floating dry dock. The man whose code-breaking made the greatest naval victory in American history possible spends the rest of the war maintaining ship hulls in a harbor. Rochefort never complains. Not then, not ever. Above his desk at Hypo, he had kept a sign that read, "We can accomplish anything provided no one cares who gets the credit." His son, an Army captain and West Point graduate, will later say his father lived by that motto until the day he died. Chester Nimitz watches this happen. He has fought for Rochefort's medal and lost. He cannot override King. He cannot stop the Redmans. The institutional machinery of the Navy has decided that Rochefort must be silenced, not because he failed, but because he succeeded when Washington said he would not. But within his own command, Chester Nimitz makes a different choice. He does not punish Fletcher for losing Yorktown. He does not relieve Ring for the flight to nowhere. He does not blame Mitscher for Hornet's disastrous air coordination. He does not fault Spruance for decisions that critics will debate for decades. This is not weakness. This is a philosophy forged decades earlier on a mud bank in the Philippines. In 1908, Ensign Chester Nimitz ran the destroyer Decatur aground in Batangas Harbor. He was court-martialed, found guilty of neglect of duty. His career should have ended. But the admiral who signed his report wrote 7 words: "This is a good officer and will take more care in the future." Those 7 words saved Chester Nimitz, and Chester Nimitz never forgot what a second chance felt like. After the war, Nimitz explains his approach in a single sentence: "The attributes of loyalty, discipline, and devotion to duty on the part of subordinates must be matched by patience, tolerance, and understanding on the part of superiors." This is not a platitude, it is a combat doctrine. At a moment when Washington is demanding names, someone to blame for the errors that nearly turned victory into catastrophe, Admiral Nimitz writes an after-action report that does something extraordinary. He does not name individuals for failures. He attributes mistakes to the fog of war, to the impossibility of coordinating multi-carrier strikes with 1940s communications technology, to the inherent chaos of combat in the worldwide Pacific theater. He frames errors as institutional lessons, not individual sins. It is the most consequential document no one remembers. The officers Nimitz protects go on to shape the rest of the war in the Pacific. Raymond Spruance becomes Nimitz's chief of staff, then commander of the Fifth Fleet. He leads the campaigns through the Marshall Islands, the Marianas, and the Philippine Sea, compiling what many historians consider the most consequential combat record of any American admiral. Frank Jack Fletcher fights 2 more carrier battles, both victories, before a wound removes him from combat command. Despite the criticism, Nimitz inscribes a photograph to him in November 1942, Vice Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher, a fine fighting admiral and a splendid shipmate. The men of Torpedo Squadron 8 receive the Presidential Unit Citation. The squadron is reconstituted, fights at Guadalcanal, and serves until the end of the war. The man Nimitz could not protect, Joseph Rochefort, retires as a captain in 1953. He never receives a decoration for his code-breaking work during his lifetime. In 1958, 16 years after the Battle of Midway, Admiral Nimitz, now retired, takes up Rochefort's cause one more time. He sends a 2-page handwritten letter to the Secretary of the Navy requesting the Distinguished Service Medal for the man who made Midway possible. The request is denied. The reason given: awards for World War II actions have been closed. Rochefort dies in 1976. He is 76 years old. He has never spoken publicly about what Washington did to him. He has never sought recognition. The sign above his desk, "We can accomplish anything provided no one cares who gets the credit," is the only statement he ever makes. But his former subordinates refuse to give up. In 1983, Rear Admiral Donald Showers, who had served under Rochefort at Station Hypo in 1942, submits a final recommendation to Secretary of the Navy John Lehman, this time supported by declassified intelligence materials that had been secret for 40 years. The case is unanswerable. In 1986, 43 years after the Battle of Midway, Joseph Rochefort's family receives the Navy Distinguished Service Medal. In 2000, he is posthumously awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Captain Edward Beach, a decorated naval officer and author, offers the epitaph the Navy should have written decades earlier. Rochefort had made more difference at a more important time than any naval officer in history. Chester Nimitz dies on February 20, 1966. He is buried at Golden Gate National Cemetery. Raymond Spruance is buried beside him. So is Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner and Admiral Charles Lockwood. They rest together, the men who won the Pacific War. But the question Midway raised, the question Nimitz answered with his after-action report, with his defense of Fletcher, with his handwritten letters for Rochefort, that question never goes away. Because every military victory produces the same temptation. Someone made mistakes. Someone's judgment failed. And the easiest thing a commander can do after a victory is find someone to blame for the parts that went wrong. Nimitz refused. Not because the mistakes did not matter. Not because the errors had no cost. 307 Americans died at Midway. The mistakes were real. He refused because he understood something most commanders do not. The men who make mistakes in battle are the same men you need for the next battle. Destroy them for what went wrong today, and you will have no one left to fight tomorrow. Washington punished the man who made the victory possible. Nimitz protected the men who carried it out. 80 years later, the U.S. Navy still debates which approach was right.